Hey gang, it's Ruben. Welcome back to Placebo Effect Podcast. I am super thrilled for my next guest, Bekah, who hosts the radio show Afternoons with Bekah on WayFM. Bekah, glad to have you on. How are you?
I am great, Ruben. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about all things being a radio DJ.
You bet, you bet. And so one of the things that has me really excited is to just get a chance to find out what life is like being a radio DJ. Like a little bit of a confession here. When I was a little kid, I used to record myself like pretending to be DJ. I thought it was going to be one of the cooler professions. I've been excited for a really long time to get a radio DJ on the show. So tell me a little about what life is like being a radio DJ today, and maybe a little bit of a background. What got you started in radio?
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned that because my start was that same thing. I had the little boombox with the microphone, and I would go around the house and interview my brothers and their friends, and they were very annoyed by it. But I remember specifically having a cassette tape that said Silly in 96, and that was my very first radio show as a little kid. And I think when you're growing up, you think, well, that's not a real career. I can't pursue that. That's so silly. Got into college, became a communications major, which for me was I don't know what else to do, so I'm just going to pick this big umbrella thing. And the college I went to, Olivet Nazarene, they have a full-powered FM radio station on campus. So it serves South Chicago. It's Shine.fm. It's since become a network, so it's on in Indianapolis and Grand Rapids as well. And one of my professors saw something in me and said, "Can you be my producer on the afternoon show?" And so I was honestly just given the opportunity. I almost feel like God had told me from an early age that this was what I was going to be doing, but I kind of fought it because I thought that's not a real job. It's not a real job. And then he's like, "All right, well, like we're going to put you in it anyway." So I got my start just as a producer on the afternoon show, eventually became co-host, and then moved to mornings, which was super hard as a college student, having to, get up at 5 a.m. when your roommates are just going to bed. That was all in Illinois. And then my husband and I were engaged at the time. He was living in Nashville, Tennessee. I knew that I would need to find a job in Nashville, Tennessee. So I reached out to the Wally Show, which is the morning show on WayFM, still is today, and tried to see if they needed an intern. And they said, "Yeah, we do." And so I came down and lived in Nashville for 2 months. Impressed them enough that at the end of my internship, they said, "Hey, we're going to keep you in mind for future openings." And eventually, after I graduated, I was given a part-time job, moved up to full-time, moved up to co-host on the show, moved to now having my own show. So my journey is not unlike a lot of people in radio in that it was people who gave us opportunities and then we just put in the work. And that sometimes looks like free work as an intern. But one of the things that impressed my bosses at the time the most was I spent the day cleaning out a closet. And to them, that's what made them want to hire me. So I tell anyone who's considering being in radio, like just get your foot in the door and work hard. And you just never know what it's going to lead to. As far as radio today, it's funny because my entire lifetime, people have been saying, "Oh, radio is a dying medium." And I'm just not seeing that yet. I think that it's definitely evolving. Obviously, podcasts becoming so much more of a thing. And here at WayFM, we have a much higher emphasis on digital now, videos and reels and TikToks that kind of support what we're doing on air. But I love it. I tell people that I have the weirdest job in the world. I run my mouth for a living, but I adore what I get to do every day.
Wow. And so you literally took that proverbial start at the mailroom kind of gig to get yourself
Yes,
moved up. You were
exactly.
super intent about it. And really interesting that you pretty much sounds like you started right at WayFM, right out of college.
Yes. So again, I had the benefit of, if a college has a radio program, it's typically, the online student radio. I had the benefit of getting to work at an actual functional radio station while in college. So that's a bit unusual, but yeah, for the most part, WayFM was right out of college, and I've been here 11 years now, and yeah, it's been great.
Awesome. And so I guess for those that don't know, what is WayFM?
Yes, so WayFM is a Christian radio station. It's a network. So I we broadcast out of Nashville, Tennessee, but we're all across the country. Denver, Colorado Springs, Louisville, Alabama. We have a few signals. West Palm Beach, Fort Myers, Florida, Charleston. So our format is music, and so I talk 6 times an hour, just kind of between songs. Sometimes for just a few seconds, sometimes for just a couple of minutes. But I'm just there to provide transition between the songs, encouragement for people. Typically, I am sharing just life stories that are hopefully relatable to other people about, what my husband's doing, what my dog's doing, whatever, is going on in the world. Uh, so yes, it's primarily music, and then I'm on air afternoons from 2 to 7 p.m. Central Time.
Right. And so you open the door there with your husband and your dog. So you're married,
Yes.
and my
Mhm.
understanding is you guys foster animals, correct?
Yes. Yep. We foster dogs from time to time. We have a foster right now. Her name's Penny. Um, it's something that we did, like most people, during the pandemic. Of, hey, well, we have this room in our house and nothing else to do, so let's take care of some extra dogs. So that's been a blast. That's been I was just talking to my boss today, in fact, about show topics, and he said, and you'll hear this in radio, and in a lot of entertainment formats, but you can't go wrong with kids and pets, because when you start talking about that, people love to talk about their kids, people love to talk about their pets. So if I share a story on the air about how our foster dog destroyed something, um, people will call in, because that's everyone wants to share, that story. Also, just on the topic of my husband, he is chronically ill. He's been sick for 8 years now, and that has definitely played into um, to the topics I do on the air, because my life was completely thrown for a loop. We were in our early 20s, newly married, and he gets um, so sick, near death. And he's doing okay now, but we've had a lot of in and out of the hospital, a lot of surgeries, a lot of really scary moments. And so that's not only informed my content and giving me a different perspective in life, but also just my faith, because I've been through the hard times, and I'm here on the other side sharing about it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm glad you're sharing that with us. And I guess
Yeah.
in terms of your faith, right? You and I, of course, both share a love of Jesus. And so, real quick background about me: I've actually been a non-believer most of my life, and
Oh, wow.
I've only been a Christian for about 8 years. So, while I've had over 50 trips around the sun, my walk with Christ is still relatively new. I'm still, growing in my faith and in my walk. But what about for you? How long have you been a Christian? How has Christ moved in your life? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I became a Christian as a kid. I was pretty young, raised in church and went to Christian college. And my faith was always real to me, and I had a relationship with Jesus. But I will say that it it it's deep. It has a deeper definition now after what I've been through. So up until my husband getting sick, it was, God is good, everything's great, and this is what we do when we serve him, and it's great. Him getting sick introduced questions to my faith, and I had to wrestle through a lot of them, as I'm sure you, someone who found relationship with Jesus later in life, you probably had all those questions in the beginning.
Totally,
um
totally.
yeah, but for me, all of a sudden, it's like, wait, is God good? Why is he letting this happen? And that has only made my faith deeper. And I'm honest about that stuff on air. I'm honest with the fact that, hey, I'm a Christian radio DJ, but sometimes I have questions. Sometimes I get mad at God, and he and I have words. We have a dialogue back and forth of, this isn't fair. This isn't okay. Like, you need to you need to show me that you're still good. Um, and I do believe he is good, but I have those moments where I've had to wrestle through it. So for me, um, Christian almost my entire life, but my faith has grown a lot deeper in the last few years.
Well, and I'm sure, especially like you said, you're your husband's battling a chronic illness, I'm sure that that probably has quite a bit of, hills and valleys for you guys when you guys are going through some of those storms, I imagine. But I would definitely say, if you say you have a walk with God and you're never mad at God, then something's wrong with your walk. So, and
No,
He's
it's
okay
so
with that too, by the way. So, God
it's
wants
so
you to be
true.
honest with Him.
And that's one thing that I'm really passionate about on my show is I want people to know that hey, it's okay to be mad at God. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to I share openly. I take antidepressants. I go to therapy. And yeah, faith is amazing and can heal anything. But also God has given us these amazing tools and there's no shame in getting help. So that's just a personal passion of mine. And I love being at WayFM specifically because I feel that we do a good job at not just making everything seem shiny, happy, no reason to ever be sad because, we're Christians. And so why would we do that? But I'm grateful that this is a place where I can share those struggles because when you share those struggles every single time, you get so many people saying, hey, me too. I thought it was the only one.
Wow. And okay, so let's back up a little bit back to the life as a DJ.
Yes.
Because one of the things I've noticed when I listen to y'all show is every once in a while you guys will give kind of an uplifting testimony from one of the callers that's calling into the radio. And before I get into like maybe how you guys choose which one touches your heart to select it, I guess just kind of in general, like how much of your work off mic, so to speak, is for you to help other people, maybe as a prayer warrior, for example?
Yeah. So I'm one of the resources that we have here is we have pastors on staff and people to pray for listeners. So I have a lot of dialogues with people who will say, hey, I heard this on your show. I'm struggling too. And we'll go back and forth. There's a woman last week where she popped into my brain. I'm like, I haven't heard from her in a while. So I emailed her and said, hey, you good? Just making sure we haven't talked in a while. So there's a lot of that, but I'm grateful that we have the resources to where if someone is struggling, if they're deep in it, I can say, hey, I'd love to have our prayer pastor pray for you. Would you be willing to have a phone call with them or whatever? As far as the testimonies and things, those come up a variety of ways. When you hear me play a phone call on my show, sometimes it's because I'll have a dialogue with someone in an email and I'll say, hey, this is a great story. Would you have just 5 minutes to call in and share this? Other times I'll solicit for specific topics on the show and people will call in. And one thing about a lot of radio stations, but our format specifically, is when you call into any of our shows on WayFM, we're always going to be recording you and you're not going to be on live. And that's less because I'm afraid someone's going to cuss, but more just to edit it down so it's a concise, impactful story that I can then, play back in a 60-second version or whatever else. As far as other listener care, I mean, we have events that when we go to, I'm happy to, pray for people or whatever else. But if I don't know that I could put a percentage of how much of my day is spent on that stuff. But honestly, it's my favorite part is getting to have those one-on-one connections when they come.
Well, and speaking of editing, right? I love your transparency in the sense of, right, I snooped a bit about the Facebook page that you have for Afternoons with Bekah on WayFM
Yeah.
too. I'm, by the way, gang, I'm going to have like those links in the description. But I saw one in particular. You posted a little. It was a short or a reel, whatever you want to call it these days, of you essentially being in this ginormous studio all by yourself, like talking to one caller and then running over to the soundboard on the other side,
Yeah.
talking to the other caller. Like, how much of that juggling act are you having to do during your afternoon segment?
It can be intense. I You'll have to link the specific video because I think the visual is really helpful
For
what it
sure.
looks like sometimes because I don't have a producer. Other shows do. And so they'll have someone in the other room who's answering calls and hearing a story and then saying, oh, hey, Becca, you should talk to this person. I don't have that. I'm that person. So it's not all day, every day that's happening. Thank goodness. But sometimes the phones will just get ringing. And because I care about that one-on-one relationship, I want to make sure that everyone feels heard. And so I'll go over and, quietly put someone on hold while someone else is talking to me over the main speaker. And then editing the calls can sometimes be a race to the finish of, oh my goodness, I have one song to edit this in, and it's a really long call. And one thing that I'm mentally doing when I'm talking to someone is thinking, okay, this is the main part that I want to make sure that I get in here. So there is a lot of that behind the scenes, a lot of chaos that can happen. Making sure that everyone's hold, and I'll go back and be like, I'm sorry, it's gonna be more minutes. Okay, because I'm having to edit the calls I've already gotten so I can get to the new ones. I try to get to as many as possible and then kind of let time dictate what ones get played back on the air, if that makes sense. So in an ideal world, I'd love to play everything back. But if I just have room for 2 calls, I'll record everything I can and then focus on the 2 best calls to edit, essentially. But I will say it's not always like that. There are several days where I am scrolling through TikTok between calls or between breaks.
Because no one's calling, right?
Right. Because I'm not constantly soliciting for calls. I'm also not, people aren't calling, 24/7. And a lot of people who do call, they need to information about something like an event or whatever else. So I'm emailing someone and being like, hey, can you help this person out or whatever. So it's not always that. Go ahead.
Well, but what do you do when you've got that like chitty chatty, right? The one that just doesn't want to hang up the phone.
Well, so I will, there's 2 kinds of chit chatters, right? Ones that just want to talk, and I will be like, hey, I'm so sorry, my song is ending in 1 minute, so I need to wrap up. And they are usually very understanding. And sometimes at the very end, I'm like, I'm so sorry, I gotta go, bye, and I'll hang up on it. But I'm trying to give them as much warning as I can of, hey, I don't have all day to talk. That's the one kind of chatty person, is the ones that are just, once they get going, they don't stop. I have one caller, I love her so much. She usually calls me after her second glass of wine. she's chatty, and I tease her about it, but she also knows that, oh, I know you got to do your job, I'll let you go. The second kind of chatter is the person in crisis. And that's one where I had a call, for example, one day of a woman who was borderline suicidal. And that's scary to me because I'm not going to brush that person off and just say, oh, I'm so sorry, I have to go do my radio job. Because nothing is more important in that moment than that person's life. So I had one instance where I was on the phone for 20 minutes and I had to skip several of my breaks, which is not advised. My boss even came in and said, like, hey, how can I help you with this? And I finally got her phone numbers to have one of our prayer and care staff members, our prayer pastors, reach out to her, which I'm really grateful for. And the great thing about them too is that they keep a log of who they call or who calls in, and they'll follow up with them. So I wouldn't be able to handle those situations without the support of people who are not only better at praying for people, but also can take the time that's needed for those situations to talk through some of that stuff.
Well, and I guess maybe not on necessarily a subject of crisis, but I mean, you didn't be doing radio a really long time, and when you're not having those, I guess, on-topic callers, right? When you maybe just have somebody calling because they, they don't know where else to go or who else to turn. Is there? It doesn't have to be a crisis. It's just because you just talked about it, but I mean, for doing radio as long as you have, is there like maybe a particularly touching moment where you're like, man, I had this one caller and I will never forget?
It's interesting because I feel like it's hard to put just to pick one over my entire career. because I think that they fall into different categories. For example, when I first started here, one that has stuck with me since then was a little 5-year-old girl getting cancer treatment who turned on WayFM so she and her friends could dance at the hospital. And that just really touched me. I had another woman who called in a few years ago now who was going blind. And so she was just telling me how she set alarms for sunrise and sunset so she could see them while she still could. The calls that stick out to me sometimes aren't even the ones that might stick out to you. You might hear a call that is my personal favorite and you're like, oh, that's a cool story. But sometimes things just catch me and you just feel it in your throat and in your gut of, oh my gosh, I don't know why I'm so moved right now. But I do have those moments on a regular basis. And there's several. I feel like I've made almost a imaginary yearbook in my head of some of those callers and their stories. So it's hard to narrow it down to just one, but those are a few that have definitely stuck with me.
That totally makes sense. But that's got to be the kind of stuff that probably like reminds you, as you said earlier, that um, I'm here, we're right where God wants me to be,
Yeah,
and you're touching people's lives, right? So that's got to
yeah,
feel pretty good.
exactly, exactly. I, yeah, exactly, absolutely. Couldn't say it better myself.
Well, one of the cool parts of your job, again, you have some of these shorter clips, both on WayFM and in your on the Facebook page, is some of the cool people you get to have longer interactions with. Like, for example, you had Brendan Lake on the show. You got to talk to him for a minute. And just recently you had King and Country in studio with you. Like, how was that?
Yes.
How did that go?
It was great. So first of all, the For King and Country Boys, I have known them since they started out. Not super personally, but I remember when they were trying to get their first song played on the radio, they came by the station I was working at south of Chicago. Um, so it's been kind of really cool to see how much they've blown up, obviously. That specific one was a difficult interview to prep for because it was a takeover. So it was in honor of their movie coming out. They were coming into the studio for 2 hours of show content. And that's unusual. That's not typical. And so I put a ton of, when I think interview, I think prep work. I don't think, oh, it's so cool I get to do this. I am nervous, no joke, for weeks ahead of it because I want it to be good content. I want to make sure that they have a great time so they want to come back. So the For King and Country interview, when I think of it, I just think of stress. But I'm thrilled with how it turned out. They had a great time. But I put a lot of prep work into that to make sure that I'm asking questions that'll get good responses, or that I have something fun and unique and different that makes the experience stand out in their mind. You also mentioned the Brandon Lake and Phil Wickham interview, which was done over video.
Yeah.
That was almost the complete opposite of the For King and Country one, because For King and Country, I had weeks to prep. I knew that I got them for a good long stretch of time so we get as much content as we needed. Um, Interviews are always recorded, by the way, as well, so we can cut them down for time. The Brandon Lake and Phil Wickham one, I found out the day before. Um, it was a 15-minute window to interview them. And I got the time wrong because I didn't notice on the email that it said
Oh
Eastern time.
no.
And so I was coming in hot and not as prepared as I'd like to be, but still got great stuff out of it, and they were so kind. But yeah, that interviews stress me out. I try to be as prepared as possible, but they run the gambit of what it looks like, whether it's a very long sit down or just that very quick video, like, okay, you're on to the next one. A lot of times artists, when they're promoting something new, they will have these media days where they are talking to you for 15 minutes, and the second you get off the Zoom call, they're hopping onto the next one and talking to that station for 15 minutes. So those can be those are just unique and challenging in their own ways.
Right. Well, I gotta tell you, if you were nervous for that rapid fire segment with Brandon, you didn't show it, and looks like you just had a really good time with that longer sit down with King and Country. So
Yeah.
you're totally a pro, Bekah. How will you
Thank
do?
you. But I tell people, I say it only comes across that way because of the prep that I put in. And I had the fortunate experience of getting to work with Wally, who's our morning show host. I was on his show for a lot of years, and he is the king of interviews. And so getting to watch him do it, and he would do multiple a week, it made me realize you have to put a lot of work into it, and it's always best if you can just come up with something unique and creative that makes it stand out in their mind, even that, oh, I had a good time with Bekah at WayFM, like I want to do that again.
Cool. Well, so one of the other things that happens on WayFM is, unlike, I guess, traditional radio media, where a lot of money is coming in from sponsors and things of that nature. While you guys do have some commercial breaks, one of the notable differences, again, for those of you that may not be familiar, don't ever tune into Christian radio. Christian radio's primary focus is to have that worship focus. So you guys have really long segments of just worship music, and then the DJ will come on break. I'm, as a listener, just giving you my perspective, right? I might hear one commercial, maybe two, and then you guys are back to like a good, like probably 20 minutes uninterrupted music and stuff like that. And so since you guys are having to pay the bills in a different way, you guys tend to have those funding events. And I'm always for sure familiar about the one that kind of happens at the end of the year, but about how many of those a year do you guys have to do?
So we are to 4 a year right now, but again, every station is different. Our sister station, KSBJ in Houston, they do 2 a year. It just kind of depends on what the funding need is, how they break it up. For example, we used to do 2 longer ones a year, and now we do 4 shorter ones a year. But our primary income is from listeners. Yes, we play commercials and we have advertising dollars that come in, but most of our money is listeners. It's community supported, and so we have these fundraisers where we have these big audacious goals, and we have a week to raise X amount of money. I always feel weird complaining about it, because how do you go to your friends and say, oh, I'm so tired, I talked all day today? But it's a lot of work that during those fundraisers, after every single song, we are talking, we're sharing stories of how people's gifts impact others by making sure that the ministry continues. So our next one is here in a couple weeks, actually. My friends tease me. They're like, I feel like it's always support drive time. And I'm like, well, it kind of is. But that's there. As much as it's a challenge to raise money and to ask for people for money, because no one likes doing that. And it's also special in that people are passionate about the ministry. People are passionate about people hearing about the love of Jesus and stories being shared. And so they're calling in to give, not because they feel obligated. Hopefully, I never want someone to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to give to WayFM. I want them to say, oh my goodness, it has made such a difference in my life, and I want that to continue for the next person.
Okay, so you said one's coming up soon. So maybe for somebody who's listening to this and it may not be happening during a giving session on WayFM, can anybody just give to the ministry anytime they want to?
Absolutely. WayFM.com. If you want to, you're absolutely welcome to. And people do throughout the year, but those drives are kind of focus time to inform people that that's how we're funded, but also to have a goal of, hey, we need to hit this mark by end of the week.
All right, so WayFM to help sponsor, and how can they listen to you specifically?
So I'm on from 2 to 7 Central Time every afternoon. You can listen at wayfm.com or through the WayFM app. Also at wayfm.com, if you are in one of our markets, you can see a list of frequencies and just see if I'm available in your car on your good old-fashioned FM radio.
And if anybody wants to get a little bit more of just Bekah, you guys also have social media too, right?
Yep, WayFM Afternoons on Instagram and Facebook. Also, WayFM Radio is our main account on Instagram and Facebook. I think there's a TikTok channel, but I don't think anyone's managing it much. So, I mean, look for us, but I don't know if we're there.
All right, y'all. Y'all know how to find Bekah. Go to wayfm.com. Check out Afternoons at WayFM. Bekah, thank you so much for coming on. It was great having you on, and I really wish you the best in your radio station.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the conversation and the questions, and even doing stuff like this is important to me because it reminds me why I do what I do, and getting to share these stories with a new audience is great too. So thank you.
My pleasure. God bless
All right,
you.
gang, that's it for this episode. If you like my content, please consider subscribing to my channel. God bless you guys.